Hello, and welcome to our discussion of the dynamic world of the railroad industry, its technology, and leadership. I'm your host, Larry Jordan, CEO of Wi-Tronix, and I'm joined today by Gary Kaufman, Wi-Tronix CFO. Together, we'll share our insights from attending Rail Trends 2023. Join us as we recap key takeaways and connect the dots between industry trends and the challenges of a demanding public relations landscape. Let's discover how these lessons shape our proactive approach to company planning for the future as we unveil our strategies for 2024. Gary, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Gary Kaufman. I'm the CFO for Wi-Tronix. I've been with the company 2 years now. It was new to the industry from beforehand, so doing a lot of learning there and have a relatively deep experience in working with early and growth stage technology companies.
All right, thank you, Gary. We're going to start today talking about market share. This is a topic I discussed during the Wi-Tronix 2022 user conference, and it comes down to the fact that railroads have been losing market share to trucks for years and continue to do so. In fact, only 41% of rail-centric traffic actually moves via rail, and only 22% of traffic that could go via truck or rail goes via rail. And ultimately, this has a large impact not only on the railroad industry, but society as a whole, as there are 3 trillion ton miles of traffic that is occurring on truck versus rail, 680 million tons of CO2, and loss of life of 4,000 human lives per year. So this is a big topic for industry and society as a whole. This was a topic that was discussed quite a bit at Rail Trends 2023. Gary, talk a little bit about some of the takeaways that you had during those discussions.
Yeah, so there was a large focus on addressing what seems to be at the root of why this market share was going down, and that is unreliable service. And as you had mentioned, Larry, or highlighted, even though there are significant advantages to be traveling on transport on freight from anywhere from any fuel efficiency, it's been studied to be 3 to 4 times more efficient from a fuel utilization standpoint. From a sustainability standpoint, as you mentioned, rail is 75. There's been studies conducted that show that rail is 75% more efficient from using lower greenhouse gas emissions. And from a rate standpoint, there's also been studies that are conducted that depending on the payload and the timing and so on and so forth, that freight rail is anywhere from 20 to 40% cheaper, and that was a study conducted by the Journal of Commerce. So, with all of those opportunities there, why would freight be losing rail freight? And a lot of it becomes down to service, and the lack of reliability around there has been a big catalyst for the decline. So, a huge opportunity for the railroad industry to address their service issues and take some of that share back when they can then parlay all of the advantages that were aforementioned.
So one of the topics that was new this year was we're now post CPKC merger, and there is a railroad that literally connects the 3 USMCA countries, the US Mexico Canada trade treaty. And there was some counterintuitive competition that was talked about that I think will help drive volume. And talk a little bit about that from a financial perspective and what was discussed at the conference regarding some of the new competition that a merger brought, which is certainly counterintuitive.
Yeah, so this was there was a long time for the people that are familiar with the industry. I think the merger, it was over 2 year time process before it was approved and completed. And as you highlighted, Larry, one of the key outcomes from there is one railroad network. One railroad operator being able to connect 3 different countries. So I think where the competition inside the industry addressed it was the other railroads started to form alliances so that they could also compete with that type of a network. So, in the case of CN and Union Pacific and Ferromex, now, of course, Union Pacific and Ferromex have a relationship starting there, but CN was not part of there. So they formed an alliance to have a service. They call it Falcon Premium. And now they can also compete similarly across the three countries. So those types of relationships were not discussed. Obviously, these are longtime railroads all standing there. Didn't have a relationship like that from before. So clearly, that was one of the examples to respond to the CPKC merger, so that the no one gets left behind, or that these railroads don't get left behind post CPKC.
So when these railroads collaborate or there's a single line of service, I guess my understanding is the customers, well, first off, they're offering a premium service. So there's a higher reliability and a shorter transit time. And that in general, the customers can work with a single point of contact to address the service concerns. Is that your understanding? You want to add a little bit? Anything that you kind of picked up on that? How these alliances are going to bring traffic back to rail?
Yeah, I think the challenges that again the industry is faces versus trucking is around the last mile and the numbers of handoffs. And as you mentioned, these types of services or these alliances to have single points will, over a long, vast distance, will now minimize some of those dealings and having to do the handoffs there. And I think that's why, as you mentioned, they were highlighting that it isn't just, hey, we've connected and we're aligned. It's that when you now sign up for the service, that you will have, single points of connection and not have to work with multiple railroads there as a big enticement to the end user customers.
Yeah, Gary, they also talked about collaboration between trucking and rail, and the fact that there is, to a certain extent, a symbiotic relationship between the two. And this is exemplified by the ongoing relationship between BNSF and JB Hunt. They have a long-standing commercial relationship, and one of the things that they did in 2023 was to introduce a new service to bring intermodal service between Mexico and the United States, where essentially containers go via rail across the border and into the heartland of the U.S., and then JB Hunt does that last mile. And they spoke at the conference about how this actually improves reliability because it's much more reliable and efficient at the borders currently to move freight traffic versus truck traffic, and eliminates a tremendous amount of congestion. Yeah, you want to add to that and maybe some other takeaways around how how these service offerings can help perhaps both trucking and rail.
So one of the points was raised, and is really is the country of Mexico and its opportunity. I believe it's now the 14th largest economy, and it's growing. And there's been more and more, as if you follow the industry, talk about nearshoring, right? So a lot of the pressures that went on in the supply chain and during the pandemic were exacerbated by the fact of how much goods and materials that are being produced out of the Asian Pacific region. And then when you added that much time and length to the process, caused a lot of issues. So this has had a lot of companies looking for opportunities around nearshoring, and Mexico has become a great opportunity for there, including extending all the way down to the shoreline or the coastal area of Mexico. So now we're talking about an extended or expanded footprint inside of Mexico that needs to be serviced. And as you mentioned, the friction points at the border presents a big opportunity for rail to be able to help navigate that. And the length and kind of the expansion in Mexico going down to the coasts will also, again, provide an opportunity for rail's efficiency over trucking to cover that much length that needs to go on, that will be going on as the nearshoring expands.
Yeah, and we see a increased attention to the last mile and connecting end-to-end commerce. We talked here around what's happening in Mexico, We've got connection points just recently. One of Wi-Tronix customers, Iowa Northern, CN, another Wi-Tronix customer, announced the intent to purchase that railroad. Of course, is going through the STB process, but that connects these railroads together. And then we saw last year, I think it was last year, the approval, STB approved CSX purchasing Pan Am railroads, which connect the East Coast, connecting some of the major metropolitan areas of the Northeast to the Canadian ports along the Atlantic. So the trend is really to bring North America together as an economic powerhouse. We also often hear folks from Germany or France referring to themselves as European. We often do not do that. As from Americans, we don't really think of North America. We don't have an identity as being North American, or at least it's not that prevalent, but we see, frankly, an economic powerhouse being built. And perhaps if we think about it more that way, we can bring that objective to fruition. So at this point, I think we're going to switch topics and talk about another important element of transformational change. And of course, we need that in the rail industry, given our large deficit to trucking and the large opportunity, and that's agility. And how do we bring agility to the rail industry? Of course, some of the most agile industries back in the 1850s was rail. Not really thought of an agile industry, an agile sector here today, but really critical that we do that. Gary, maybe talk a little bit about that theme of agility, and maybe it wasn't overt during the conference, but how you see agility playing into this transition to a growth mindset.
Yeah, I would say from what my observations were was a focus on technology. There was it was a common through line through almost every presentation and panel that spoke to was the needs to continue to leverage technology from an overall efficiency standpoint to help combat some of the labor issues and the concerns that the industry's facing, and those are really the only kind of sustainable ways to address. And then I think one of the other aspects where agility is going to become more important in this battle against taking share back from the trucking industry is that one of trucking industry's advantages is, besides the end to the last mile and minimal ability to kind of deliver all the way through, is their increasing ability to provide visibility of where shipments are. And there's been several technologies in the last few years that have been deployed in that industry, and the trucking is using that. So they're leveraging their advantages already around, being able to do first and last mile by showing visibility so customers know where their freight stands at any point in time. And that's been an area that rail has struggled with and will continue to drive a wedge unless that part's addressed. So there's now been a much more of a focus and discussions around, which I would say in that agility world, which is how does the rail industry make itself more visible so that that advantage or perceived advantage of trucking will decline over time. So again, when you think visibility from that standpoint and track, it's really going to be technology that's going to have to come to the forefront to solve those key problems for the industry.
Yeah, it's important that we consider all the elements of agility. And one of the things that we leverage here a lot here at Wi-Tronix that's kind of core to agility is this iterating quickly, trying something, see if it works, iterate on it. If it doesn't work, kind of back to the drawing board, maybe scrap that idea completely. One of the I would say shining stars of agility that was talked about was, I think they called them pop-up intermodal facilities, where they built essentially a temporary facility, looked to see if the demand for intermodal traffic came to fruition like they thought it was going to. And if it didn't, then they hadn't invested millions of dollars in capital. And if it did, they had an idea about how much or how big the market was so they could right size the permanent facilities. I think this was a great example. I don't think they really talked about it at the conference in the terms of agility, but those are the types of things that I look at as kind of a preacher of agility that was really great to see. We see SpaceX doing some very similar things using large semi-permanent tents to see what they need and then build something permanent. Were there other elements of agility that you saw kind of popping through the surface during the discussions?
I would say one aspect of it, and again, I think that seemed to be increasing. Now, again, I don't have this much of experience in the industry as you do, Larry, but the relationship between the short lines and the class ones was talked about extensively. That working tighter, working closer with that groups. Well, again, that's obviously the short lines are the path to deal with the last mile for rail and the handoffs there. So efficiency gains and improved relationships there once again, and better coordination will make the industry overall more efficient and address some of those service concerns. So there was a panel with the head of the Short Line Association talking about their expanded reach, the discussions about the opportunities from the Infrastructure Act. That money is now finally starting to flow. That was designated from there and making its way into rail, which has been kind of an anomaly. This has been an industry that's been largely privately funded and self funded. So the opportunity to get some of this government funding, I think, has also created some agility in the industry in terms of what types of projects, how we create alignment and be able to kind of tap into that as an opportunity. So I saw that was another, I think, key theme was to the coordination between short lines and class ones and being able to leverage some of this opportunity that came out of the Infrastructure Act that we may have forgotten out a little bit because it was a little bit a while ago and there's been lots of other items in the news cycle, but that money is now getting ready to flow, and I think will benefit the industry provided we maintain and stay agile.
Yeah, we talked about the Infrastructure Act and the amount of funding that's available through Kersey grants to help the industry move forward, bring back market share, technology and agility. I think a theme that was underlined. It's not really on the funding element, but the use of new technology and the agility there, and making sure that from the regulatory perspective that all keeps up and that railroads can effectively leverage the new technology as new methods to perhaps do the same things are available. So we're all looking, the whole industry is looking to the FRA to welcome technology and to help catalyze agility in the industry in the rules making elements so that we can leverage this newfound capabilities. So at this point, I'm going to shift a little bit to suppliers and the supplier's role within the industry community. At Rail Trends, there's a very diverse group of companies represented in other agencies. We have the STB, the chairman of the STB spoke. We had industry groups like the American Short Line and Regional Railroad Association, AAR, of course, railroads. But if you looked at the overall audience, the vast majority of the audience are rail suppliers, and a very diverse group of suppliers like Wi-Tronix that are very technology focused, essentially technology companies, all the way to construction companies. And there's a lot of discussion about diversity and the strengths of diversity. And we certainly saw that in the room with all these different strengths and capabilities. And as we were going through, I thought about the supplier's role. What is the supplier's role in bringing back rail traffic and making the industry stronger? And of course, that's one of the reasons we're doing this podcast here today. So, Gary, maybe talk a little bit about the supply community and our role of helping the industry grow. Of course, we're all vested. We all have a vested interest in the economic success of the industry. But what, as suppliers, can we do to help?
Yeah, I think there's, as you kind of highlighted, Larry, there was a range of folks in the room, and and anywhere from companies that are dedicated. So, like in the case of Wi-Tronix, we solely focus on rail, to consulting firms that will have industry expertise, and some people, but cover a wide swath of industries. I think it's important to kind of have that kind of combination, because obviously if it was only people that are just focused on the industry, you might get a little insular. And in terms of having suppliers that have other perspectives or other views on other industries, there could still be themes and aspects of learnings to kind of bring back into the industry. I think in the case of a supplier like ourselves, Wi-Tronix, we stay focused on, again, back to some of those principles you set up at the earlier part of the conversation. There's so much opportunity for rail to increase traffic because of its standing around fuel efficiency, sustainability, and cost advantages. So, I think the perspective that suppliers can bring in is to say, there's how do we leverage or sustain or enhance those opportunities around those three pillars? And then once there's momentum around there, then go back to perhaps the AAR, that I think there's been an opportunity for greater promotion of those aspects that unfortunately have taken, especially this year, have kind of taken a step back. For Can't have a discussion here without at least referencing East Palestine and what had happened earlier in the year with that derailment and a lot of the negative attention. And of course, that was coming off of a few months before the rail strikes that were the labor strikes and the issues that were going on there that fortunately got averted. But there was kind of a back to back of negative trends in the industry. So I think the suppliers can really help the industry around that perceived negative aspects, get back to the strengths of the industry, enhance those strengths, and then help support a much different PR campaign with statistics and value around how efficient and how safe and how sustainable this industry is.
Yeah, it's interesting as we have built our team and continue to build our team here at Wi-Tronix, many potential team members, arrive at the Wi-Tronix doorstep or maybe through the interview process without a lot of knowledge of the industry. And it's really a great story. It's when you have a mode of transportation that's the most efficient, it's the greenhouse gases are the lowest, so maybe somebody that's a topic they care about tremendously. It's the safest mode of transportation. It's the most cost effective. It lifts the productivity of the entire economy. Those are all great attributes, and then you tie that to a staying power of goes back, 150, 200 years. These are attributes of an industry that most people would be kind of very anxious to enter into, yet many people, and this was discussed a little bit, don't want to be involved in the industry. And it's really important for us to talk as an industry, as a supply base, about how great of an industry and how great of opportunities there are in this industry. I'm certainly one to just talk about self-fulfilling prophecy, and the more that we can get the message and market this great industry, people will hear about it, and ultimately people will take notice and perhaps move their shipping business from one mode to the other, which will help us all. So let me take a step back. You mentioned East Palestine, and yeah, I think this is something that's very difficult for a small company like Wi-Tronix to spend a ton of money on public relations. But wow, there's a great story there. We really need to invest. The industry needs to invest in telling that story. Otherwise, the story gets told for us. And at the times when things don't go right, and we really can't revert in back into a hole and just cross our fingers. Some things will go wrong in the future, and we need to help the general public understand just how beneficial rail is. And it's not just that kind of pain in the rear end on their commute to or from work that's slowing them down.
I'd say one, if I could add one further topic here, and again, it's obviously as you'd mentioned, Larry, Wi-Tronix is a technology company at its heart, so that's really going to be the lens in which we view things. But in terms of as we talk about 2024 and trends that we're developing this year and will continue to develop, you really can't cite that without referencing artificial intelligence, AI, and the explosion of that, which came on in 2023, led by Chat GPT from OpenAI, and then much other work then done with competitive offerings there. But as you may recall, a little bit about a year ago, this time is when ChatGPT had launched, and I believe it was within a month they had over 100 million users registered. And in terms of how does that work its way into our industry, as there are many opportunities to leverage artificial intelligence to determine what's going on, obviously both inside the rail cars as well as outside as they're traveling all over the country. And this network that we described, that's those opportunities there. You can use AI to address some of those other concerns we talked about as well. We can use that to help make the railroads more safe, even more sustainable, and increase, especially around the safety area. There's many opportunities in terms of where the issues are known around safety that AI can help leverage that and make the railroads that much more efficient. So I think that was just one other point I wanted to touch on here in terms of what we saw there. There was definitely discussion as well in rail trends around AI, but I think a big opportunity for the industry to coalesce around there and perhaps leverage that as one of those talking points about how safe and efficient and sustainable the industry is.
Yeah, Gary, the technologies that we're introducing that where AI is the foundation, a lot of very exciting opportunities. These are challenges that the rail industry has many of them have had for 100 years, maybe a little less in some cases, but they were problems that a lot of time wasn't spent on because they were unsolvable. And now suddenly with the introduction of AI and particularly large language models and computer vision, now these problems are solvable, and they will have a step impact in many of the areas that we discussed. They'll have a step positive impact, certainly in safety and likely in efficiency and reliability also, which takes an industry that's already leading in all these attributes and just helping take another step in the positive direction. So, with that, I'd like to thank the audience for joining us here today for a deep dive into the dynamic world of the rail industry. As we reflect on our experiences at the conference, it's clear that the rail industry is not only a hub of innovation, but also a landscape where effective leadership and strategic planning are critical. I'd like to thank the audience for spending time with Gary and I here today, and have a great and safe day. Thank you.